There is a room on the southern coast of Peru where the skulls do not sit the way skulls are supposed to sit. They rise. Each one sweeps back and upward from the brow in a single deliberate curve, as though the head had been poured into a mold instead of grown inside a womb. The glass in front of them is ordinary. The light is the flat white glare of the desert coming through a dusty window. And row upon row of them face you at once. Tan, cracked, and completely silent, their empty eye sockets tilted up toward a ceiling that has nothing to tell them. They are real. They came out of the sand less than 100 years ago, and almost everything you have been told about them is either too small to be true or too large to be spoken out loud. The collection sits in the Paracas History Museum, a modest building in a fishing town on a peninsula that juts into the Pacific like a broken finger. The skulls there are not gently egg-shaped. They are extreme. The brain case runs backward at an angle that adds inches to the profile, narrowing the forehead and lifting the crown into a shape closer to a teardrop than a globe. Some of them are noticeably light in the hand. A few show a strange smoothness where the plates of an ordinary human skull would meet in a jagged seam. Visitors who handle them describe an uncanny wrongness, a sense that the object in their palm belongs to the right species and the wrong one at the same time. That feeling is the entire reason this collection is famous, and it is also the trap. Because the moment you feel it, two answers arrive to explain it, and both of them are lying to you in opposite directions. One says there is nothing here at all. The other says there is everything. Neither has looked closely at the people who actually made these heads. Start with who found them, because he is the man both answers prefer to skip. In 1927, a Peruvian archaeologist named Julio C. Tello walked across the wind-scoured sand of the Paracas Peninsula and located a necropolis that would rewrite the map of South American prehistory. Tello was not a colonial adventurer. He was Quechua, born in the Andean highlands, the first indigenous American to become a professional archaeologist. Trained at Harvard and returned home to prove that Peru's ancient civilizations were built by Peruvians. At a site called Wari Kayan, he uncovered more than 400 mummy bundles, each one a body folded into a seated crouch and wrapped in layer after layer of woven cloth. Those textiles are among the finest ever produced by any human culture anywhere at any time. Embroidered in threads dyed a dozen colors that have not faded in 2,000 years, they depict flying figures, sea creatures, and warriors, stitched with a density that modern weavers struggle to reproduce by hand. The people who made them are called the Paracas, and they lived on that coast between roughly 800 and 100 BC. They farmed a desert using irrigation, fished the cold Pacific, performed brain surgery on living patients with tools of obsidian and bronze, and buried their dead with staggering care. And they shaped the heads of their children. This is the fact that gets lost between the two loud answers, so let me put it plainly. The deliberate reshaping of the human skull is one of the oldest and most widespread cultural practices on Earth. It is called artificial cranial deformation, and it appears on every inhabited continent. The skull of a newborn is soft, its plates unfused, its bones still partly cartilage. Bind it with boards, with pads, with tight circular wrapping. During the first months of life, and the growing brain, which reaches nearly its full size within a few years, quietly fills whatever shape you have imposed. The Maya did it, the Huns did it, peoples of the ancient Near East, of Central Africa, of the islands of Melanesia, and of Bronze Age Europe did it. The Greek physician Hippocrates described an entire nation of headbinders more than 2,000 years ago. It was not mutilation. It was identity, worn on the one part of the body no one could ever take off, a mark of lineage, of rank, of belonging to a particular people in a particular valley. The Paracas simply did it more dramatically than almost anyone else who ever tried. So how did a well-understood indigenous practice become the internet's favorite proof of a non-human race? The turn has a date. In 2014, a set of Paracas skulls held by that museum were sent for genetic testing, and the results were released, not through a scientific journal, but through a documentary and a series of public announcements. The claim, as it spread, was electric. A geneticist, working from samples of bone and hair, had supposedly found mitochondrial mutations that matched no known human, that had no counterpart in the databases of our species, that pointed toward something outside the family tree entirely. The man promoting the testing, a tour guide and author named Brian Forster, framed the finding as an open question with an unmistakable lean. Perhaps these were not fully, or not only, human beings. The story did exactly what such stories do. It traveled. It multiplied. It became the thing people know about Paracas, even when they know nothing else. Here is where I have to slow down, because the pattern this channel keeps finding requires that I be as honest about weak evidence as I am about strong evidence. The 2014 results were never published in a peer-reviewed journal. They were never subjected to independent replication. The identity of the analyzing geneticist and the raw data behind the claim were never fully laid open for other scientists to examine, and there is an ordinary, unglamorous explanation for mutations unknown in humans, that anyone who works with ancient DNA reaches for first: contamination. Bone that has sat in warm desert sand for 2,000 years, handled by excavators, museum staff, and tourists, is a graveyard of degraded fragments, human, bacterial, fungal, environmental. Pull DNA from it without pristine laboratory controls, and you can find sequences that match nothing cleanly, not because the sample is alien, but because the sample is a ruin. The stated finding was a new kind of human. What the method could actually support was a contaminated red from a compromised bone. Those are not the same sentence. I could stop there. Most people who debunk this stop there, and they are right to. And they are also missing the more interesting half, because the sensational answer, collapsing, does not make the skulls ordinary. It just moves the mystery to where it actually lives. Take the features that make visitors uneasy, one at a time, and watch what real science does with them. The lightness and the thin bone. Tight, prolonged binding does not only change the outline of a skull, it changes the growth of the bone itself, thinning some regions and thickening others as the plates are forced along new lines of stress. A deformed skull can genuinely feel wrong in the hand without a single non-human cell in it. The smooth crown, the so-called missing suture. This is the claim that sounds most damning and holds up the least. The sutures, the jagged seams where the skull plates knit together, are directly affected by cranial binding. Pressure can delay their closure, distort their path, or in extreme cases, obscure them almost entirely. The absence people point to as proof of a different anatomy is, to a physical anthropologist, a predictable consequence of exactly the practice we already know these people performed. And the cranial capacity, the volume, the whispered idea that the brain inside was somehow larger. Generations of measurement across deformed populations worldwide converge on a boring, stubborn result. Reshaping the skull redistributes volume without meaningfully increasing it. You can make a head longer and change where its space sits. You cannot bind a bigger brain into being. The elongated Paracas skull is a differently shaped container for a human-sized mind, which is precisely what the genetics say when the genetics are done properly. Set aside the 2014 announcement and look at the legitimate work. In 2020, a landmark study in the journal Cell reconstructed the deep genetic history of the ancient Andes from dozens of properly excavated, properly sequenced genomes spanning thousands of years. It found a population history of astonishing depth and continuity. Indigenous American lineages rooted on that continent for millennia, developing in place. There is no genetic trapdoor in that record, no signal of an outside species walking the Peruvian coast. The people who shaped these heads were the ancestors of the people who live there now. Now, the fair counterargument, stated at full strength, everything unusual about these skulls is explained by artificial cranial deformation, acting on an ordinary human skeleton, and the anomalies were manufactured by bad sampling and worse publicity. I think that argument is correct about the shape. I think it is correct about the DNA scare. And I think it quietly answers the wrong question because it treats not aliens as if it were the same as nothing left to explain. It isn't. Who exactly were the Paracas, and where did their particular population come from before they reached that shore? Why did this one desert culture push the practice to such an extreme when their neighbors did not? What did the shape mean? Which lineage, which rank, which claim on the world was a mother making permanent on her infant's head? The DNA does not fully explain that. It cannot. The shape is solved. The people are not. I want to be honest about where this left me because it is not where I expected to land. I went in braced to either expose a hoax or defend one, and the material refused to let me do either cleanly. The exciting version, the mutation with no human match, the head that broke the family tree, falls apart the moment you ask it to survive peer review, and I am not going to pretend otherwise to keep a story alive. But the deflating version, the one that waves the whole thing away as just deformation, move along, started to feel like its own kind of erasure the longer I sat with it. Both answers are in a hurry to be finished. Both of them talk over the only people in the room who cannot talk back. And somewhere between the two, the actual questions, real, open, researchable questions about who these people were, go unasked because one crowd already has aliens and the other already has boredom. This is the pattern, and once you see it, you start noticing it everywhere the past gets loud. A genuine, sophisticated, deliberate achievement by an indigenous people gets flattened from both sides at once. The sensationalists take the heads away from the Paracas and hand them to a fantasy, because it is somehow more thrilling to believe a coastal desert culture could not have made something this strange than to believe they could. And the debunkers, in their rush to shoot the fantasy down, so thoroughly normalize the practice that the artistry and the intent behind it vanish too. In both stories, the people disappear. In one, they are replaced by visitors from elsewhere. In the other, they are reduced to a footnote about infant bone. Look at what the practice actually required. A mother binding her child's skull was making a decision that could not be undone, following a design she did not invent but inherited, executing it with enough precision that the result reads as a signature 2,000 years later. That is not superstition. That is a technology of identity, maintained across centuries. In coding information, we have largely lost the ability to read which lineage a person belonged to, which rank they held, which of the loose confederation of coastal groups claimed them as one of their own. Run your hand along the back of your own head, along the smooth curve of a skull no one ever thought to shape. You were allowed to keep the head you were born with. These children were given a shape on purpose by people who knew exactly what they were doing and why, and who left us no written key to what it said. The skulls are not the mystery. The skulls are the answer to a question, and we have thrown away the question and kept only the strangeness of the reply. We stare at the shape and argue about whether it fell from the sky when the harder and more human truth is sitting in the same glass case that a real people, on a real coast, spent centuries turning the human head into a language, and we can no longer read a single word of it. So go back to that room. The flat desert light, the dusty glass, the row of long tilted skulls facing out with their sockets angled up toward a ceiling that will never answer them. They are not the remains of a lost non-human race. And knowing that changes almost nothing about how it feels to stand in front of them, because the questions that actually matter never depended on the aliens. Who were you? Not your species. We know your species. Who are your people, and where on this earth did they begin before they reached that coast? What did the shape of your head announce to the stranger who met you, your family, your standing, your God? Why did your mother choose the mold she chose from among the designs her own mother handed down? And why did the makers of the finest cloth the ancient world ever wove leave no line, no glyph, no thread that tells us what any of it meant? The people who could answer have been silent for 2,000 years. The bones survived. The textiles survived. The practice was recorded in the very shape of the dead. The only thing that did not survive was the meaning, and almost no one is looking for it, because one side is busy with a fairy tale and the other is busy proving the fairy tale wrong. The skulls wait behind the glass either way. They have been waiting a very long time to be asked the right question.